looking at Africa and East Africa region itself, what is happening? Are we making any progress towards addressing impunity and issues of transnational and international crimes?
Well, I think it's a valid and legitimate concern amongst various communities and people that the ball hasn't moved forward enough in the fight against impunity. If you look at Kenya, there's no justice and accountability for the victims of the post-election violence in 2007, 2008. If you look at Darfur, there's no justice for the victims of the atrocities committed there. There's much more injustice than there is justice, and there's a lot more demand for accountability than there is supply of it, not only in Africa but in the whole world. States in particular only care about international crimes sometimes. They don't always care about them equally. Communities don't always care about them equally. They don't resonate the same amount all the time. So I think some sobriety in the way that we look at the project of international criminal justice here in Africa, but also in the rest of the world, is necessary. And that includes admitting that there have been a lot of failures and a lot of unmet promises and disappointed expectations. That being said, I think there is a lot of activity around the world and here in East Africa. We have the International Crimes Division in Uganda. We have the proposed International and Organized Crimes Division in Kenya. You have a lot of activity in civil society and amongst state actors who are very interested in trying to achieve justice and accountability, not only for international crimes, but also for transnational and organized crimes.
And what kind of impediments are interfering with this progress that we see? Is it lack of political will? Is it lack of coordination? Or what exactly is the problem?
Well, I think we talk a lot about political will, and certainly it is part of the problem. In particular, if you think about international crimes and transnational organized crimes, but in particular international crimes, they're very political in nature. They're ultimately the result of a particular type of politics that spills over into the commission of political violence and mass atrocities. They don't come out of nowhere. So there you always have the issue of political will, or perhaps even better, the possibility and the real potential of political interference. And for international criminal justice to be put forward and propelled as a project, I really think it requires a partnership in doing that, in pushing the ball forward, but also in a partnership in taking responsibility of the failures and unmet expectations. Because if you don't, then you're not really learning and you're not really maturing. And in this instance in particular, I think it's important to recognize that international criminal justice is a relatively young project. It's not that old, right? It's it's probably in its teenage years. And so it relies on state actors, it relies on civil society actors and leaders and practitioners of various stripes, journalists, and I think everybody's learning together. And in order to move it forward, we also need to learn from past mistakes, and everybody needs to take responsibility for those.
How do you think East Africa can address transnational crimes? Because you have Kenya, it's got its own separate jurisdiction. You look at Uganda, separate jurisdiction. How can the different countries work together? For example, when you look at issues of wildlife crime, it's cross-cutting. I mean, it comes from one country to another. So how can they, for example, try to investigate and prosecute this kind of crimes more effectively?
Here I think a lot of work needs to be done in terms of creating really strong channels of communication between various states' agencies, but also internally, right? So you need to strengthen the ability of authorities and officials in Uganda to speak to authorities and officials in Tanzania and Kenya, but also you need to strengthen the ties for example, actors investigating wildlife crimes in Kenya speaking to the Kenyan Airport Authority to ensure that they're speaking to each other as well. So you I think we have a challenge, and there's a distinct challenge in strengthening both the relationships between agencies and officials within those states, and then simultaneously strengthening the relationships between those agencies and the government agencies and officials and their counterparts regionally. And then on top of it, which I think is the real major challenge as well, in addition to working domestically and regionally, is what happens upstream. So, ivory isn't, if ivory goes through the port in Mombasa, that might be going to China, or it might be going to Vietnam, it might be going, wherever it might be going. So how do we hold those actors accountable as well, the upstream actors who may be responsible and who may actually be driving transnational and organized crimes that are being perpetrated here in East Africa?
Okay, thank you. Unless you have something else that you'd like to say that I didn't ask.
No, thank you very much. Thanks,
you.
Judy.